I'm Mark, 57 years old, a proud father who raised my daughter Lisa single-handedly after my wife Catherine died of cancer when Lisa was just 9. Today should have been the happiest day of my life, watching my little girl get married. Instead, I'm standing outside this grand venue, stunned, as Lisa just told me I wasn't invited and needed to leave. I quietly walked away, got in my car, and made a decision that would change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear what happened after I cancelled all the wedding payments. My story begins long before today's wedding disaster. I built a successful construction and contracting business from the ground up, working my way through long hours and challenging projects to establish myself. By the time I met Catherine, I had a small but growing company and dreams of building a family. Catherine was everything I wasn't, cultured, soft-spoken, and from a more refined background than my blue-collar roots. We complemented each other perfectly. She softened my rough edges, and I gave her a sense of security and stability she had always wanted. Our wedding was simple but meaningful, nothing like the extravagant affair Lisa had planned with the Andersons' influence. When Lisa was born, our lives changed completely. Catherine took to motherhood, naturally creating this warm, loving environment for our daughter. I still remember how she would sing lullabies every night, no matter how tired she was. Lisa had her mother's eyes and my stubborn determination, a combination that made her absolutely irresistible to both of us. Everything was perfect until Catherine started feeling unusually tired when Lisa was about 6. At first, we chalked it up to the demands of raising an energetic child while managing our household. But when the fatigue persisted and she started losing weight, we knew something was wrong. The diagnosis came like a sledgehammer. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer already spread to her liver. The next 18 months were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, brief periods of hope followed by devastating setbacks. I tried to shield Lisa from the worst of it, but children sense when something is fundamentally wrong in their world. Catherine fought bravely, determined to see Lisa grow up, but the disease was merciless. She passed away when Lisa was 9, leaving me to figure out how to be both mother and father to our grieving daughter. The first year without Catherine was the hardest. I had a business to run and a child to raise, 2 full-time jobs with seemingly incompatible demands. I remember one night finding Lisa crying in her room, clutching one of her mother's scarves. "It doesn't smell like her anymore," she sobbed. That night, I made a silent promise to Catherine that I would give Lisa everything she would have wanted for her. My business suffered as I rearranged my schedule around school events, doctor appointments, and the everyday needs of a growing girl. I turned down lucrative contracts that would have required travel and hired additional staff to handle projects I would have personally overseen before. My business partner, Frank, couldn't understand why I wouldn't just hire a full-time nanny. "She needs me, not a stranger," was my constant reply. Lisa's elementary school years were filled with father-daughter dances where I felt completely out of place among the mothers who had stepped in for other absent fathers. I learned to braid hair from YouTube tutorials and became an expert at packing nutritious lunches. I signed her up for every activity she showed interest in, ballet, soccer, piano lessons, wanting to give her every opportunity. Perhaps my biggest mistake was trying to compensate for Catherine's absence with material things. Whenever Lisa expressed interest in something, I would get it for her, whether it was the latest electronic gadget designer clothes or expensive summer camps. I realize now that I was trying to fill an unfillable void with possessions and inadvertently teaching Lisa that she could have anything she wanted just by asking. As Lisa grew older, I noticed changes in her personality. The sweet, thoughtful child began showing signs of entitlement. She would compare her possessions to her friends and come home with lists of things she needed to keep up. I rarely said no, justifying each purchase as something that would make her happy in a life that had already seen too much sadness. By the time Lisa entered high school, we had settled into a routine that worked for us, though the easy closeness of her childhood was fading. I attended every parent-teacher conference and cheered at every volleyball game. But increasingly I felt like I was watching her life rather than being an integral part of it. Still, I was immensely proud of her academic achievements and the confident young woman she was becoming, even if I didn't always understand her. The teenage years brought a natural distance between us, something I was told was normal, but felt like another loss in a life already marked by absence. Lisa was busy with friends' activities and schoolwork, excelling in ways that made my chest swell with pride. She maintained honor roll status throughout high school and set her sights on prestigious universities. When college acceptance letters started arriving, Lisa had her pick of excellent schools. She chose Briarcliff University, a private institution known for its exceptional marketing program and, frankly, its steep tuition. The cost made my stomach clench, but I never hesitated. This was what Catherine would have wanted for our daughter: the best education possible, regardless of price. "Dad, are you sure we can afford this?" Lisa asked as we reviewed the financial aid package, which barely made a dent in the overall expense. "Don't worry about the money," I assured her. "I've been saving for your education since before you were born. This is your future we're talking about." The truth was that I hadn't saved nearly enough, but I would figure it out. I remortgaged my house and took on additional high-stress projects to ensure her tuition was paid in full each semester. Lisa didn't need to know about the long nights I spent poring over bids and contracts, trying to squeeze more profit from each job. College transformed Lisa in ways I hadn't anticipated. She came home for holidays with new vocabularies, new perspectives, and increasingly a subtle air of judgment about our modest home and my straightforward lifestyle. She would make casual comments about her roommate's family vacation to Europe, or a classmate's father who was on the board of some corporation. "You should see Melanie's apartment in the city, Dad. Her parents got it for her, so she wouldn't have to live in the dorms after freshman year." I would smile and nod, swallowing the hurt that came with these comparisons. I couldn't give Lisa everything these other parents could, but I was giving her everything I had. After her undergraduate degree, Lisa announced she wanted to pursue a master's in marketing communications. Again, I supported her decision financially, stretching my resources even thinner. By this point, my business was doing well, but years of prioritizing Lisa's needs over expansion opportunities had limited its growth potential. When Lisa graduated with her master's degree, I sat in the audience bursting with pride and quietly terrified about the business loan I'd taken out to cover her final year. She looked so polished and professional in her cap and gown, worlds away from the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest, watching cartoons. Lisa landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm in the city, and I helped her secure her first apartment, covering the security deposit and first few months of rent until she got on her feet. It was during this time that she met Brian Anderson at a company event. He worked in finance for a client of her firm, and according to Lisa, they connected immediately. The first time I met Brian, I had mixed feelings. He was polished and articulate, clearly intelligent and successful in his own right. But there was a reserve to him that I couldn't quite penetrate, a careful way of speaking that made me wonder if I was getting the real person or a calculated presentation. "Brian's family has a summer home in the Hamptons," Lisa told me excitedly, after they had been dating for a few months. They've invited me to spend the 4th of July weekend with them. That sounds nice, I said, ignoring the pang that came with knowing I would be spending the holiday alone for the first time in years. His folks seemed to be quite well off. The Andersons are one of the oldest families in New York, banking, Lisa said, with an emphasis that suggested I should have known this. His father sits on the boards of 3 major corporations. When Lisa and Brian moved in together after a year of dating, their apartment was in an exclusive neighborhood I could never have afforded on my own. During my first visit, I felt distinctly out of place among the minimalist furniture and expensive art pieces that Lisa explained were investments. I noticed the changes in Lisa's demeanor and priorities more acutely after she began spending time with the Andersons. Phone calls became less frequent and shorter. When we did speak, she would often mention the philanthropic events she had attended with Brian's family, or the important people she had met through them. Mrs. Anderson is on the committee for the Metropolitan Museum Gala, she told me once. She introduced me to the editor of Vogue last week. With each of these conversations, I felt Lisa slipping further into a world I couldn't access or understand. The Andersons' influence was evident in everything from her changed speech patterns to her new wardrobe filled with subtle, expensive pieces that Mrs. Anderson had helped her select. "That tie is a bit bold, Dad," she commented during one of our increasingly rare dinners together. It was the tie Catherine had given me for our last anniversary, a fact Lisa either didn't remember or chose not to acknowledge. I began feeling like an outsider in my daughter's new life, a relic from a past she seemed eager to reimagine, or perhaps leave behind entirely. Still, I told myself that her happiness was what mattered most, even if that happiness seemed increasingly tied to a social status and lifestyle far removed from the values Catherine and I had tried to instill. The Andersons never made any overt comments about my background or occupation, but their condescension was evident in subtle ways. The slightly surprised "oh" when Lisa mentioned my construction business, or the way they would simplify their conversations when I joined them as if I couldn't possibly understand their discussions about market trends or political connections. Despite these changes, I continued to make efforts to maintain our relationship. I would send thoughtful texts, suggest lunch dates when I was in the city for business, and remember small details about her work projects to ask about. Sometimes these efforts were reciprocated, but more often I received brief, distracted responses that left me feeling more disconnected than before. I still remember the Sunday afternoon when Lisa and Brian came to my house for what I thought would be a regular visit. Lisa was practically glowing as she extended her left hand, showcasing an enormous diamond engagement ring. "Dad, we're engaged," she announced, her eyes shining with excitement. "Brian proposed last night at Le Bernardin." I hugged them both, genuinely happy for my daughter's happiness. "Congratulations. This is wonderful news. Welcome to the family, Brian," I said, clapping him on the back, perhaps a bit harder than necessary. Brian smiled his practiced smile. "Thank you, sir. I want you to know that I'll take good care of Lisa." Something about the way he said it made me feel as if he was implying I hadn't done a good enough job, but I pushed the thought aside. This was a day for celebration, not for reading into things. "We're thinking of a spring wedding," Lisa continued. "Nothing too elaborate, but nice." "Whatever you want, sweetheart," I said. "This is your special day, and I want it to be perfect for you. In fact," I added, "I'd like to cover the wedding expenses. It's important to me to do this for you." The tradition of the bride's father paying for the wedding was something Catherine and I had always assumed we would follow. Even though times had changed, I wanted to do this for Lisa, and for Catherine's memory. Lisa's eyes widened. "Really, Dad, that's so generous. Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I assured her. "I've been saving for this day since you were little. Your mom would have wanted you to have a beautiful wedding." Brian cleared his throat. "That's very kind, Mr. Thompson, but you should know that my parents will likely want to contribute as well. In our circles, weddings are important social events." There was that phrase, "our circles," creating a distinction I couldn't help but notice. Still, I nodded agreeably. "Of course we can discuss how to handle things. The important thing is that Lisa gets the wedding she wants." The following weekend, I met Brian's parents for the first time at an uncomfortably formal dinner at their country club. Harold Anderson was tall and imposing with silver hair and the confident demeanor of a man accustomed to being obeyed. His wife, Margaret, was elegantly preserved, her smile never quite reaching her calculating eyes. "So, Mark," Harold said, after preliminary pleasantries had been exchanged, "Lisa tells us you're in construction." The way he said construction might as well have been waste management, for all the enthusiasm he showed. "Yes, I own Thompson Contracting," I replied. "We specialize in commercial properties throughout the Northeast." "Fascinating," Margaret interjected with patent disinterest. "And you built the business yourself? No family connections in the industry?" "Started from scratch," I confirmed, sensing this was somehow a strike against me in their estimation. "How novel," she remarked, exchanging a glance with her husband. "Harold's family has been in banking for 4 generations." The dinner continued in this vein, with subtle jabs at my background, interspersed with discussions about the wedding that increasingly seemed to exclude my input. The Andersons had definite ideas about venue guest list and appropriate vendors, all of which seemed to translate to the most expensive options possible. Initially, I was included in planning meetings. Lisa, Brian, the Andersons, and I met with a wedding planner whose fee alone made me wince. I listened as they discussed locations I had never heard of and traditions I didn't understand, like the necessity of a rehearsal dinner cruise around Manhattan. "Dad, is this okay?" Lisa would occasionally ask, her expression hopeful. "I know it's more than we originally discussed. If it's what you want, we'll make it work." I would respond, not wanting to disappoint her or appear unsophisticated in front of the Andersons. After these meetings, I transferred a substantial sum into a special account I had set up for Lisa's wedding expenses. "This should cover the initial deposits," I told her, handing her the account information. "Just let me know when you need more." Lisa hugged me tightly. "You're the best dad ever. I promise this will be worth every penny." As the weeks passed, I noticed a pattern emerging. The planning meetings were rescheduled to times when I had immovable work commitments. Decisions were made and communicated to me after the fact. When I would inquire about certain details, Lisa would become evasive. "Oh, Mrs. Anderson handled the floral arrangements," she would say. "And Brian's father knows the owner of the venue, so they took care of that contract." I began hearing about lavish additions to the wedding through indirect channels. A custom-built dance floor, imported champagne, celebrity entertainment for the reception. The budget we had initially discussed was clearly being ignored, but whenever I tried to bring it up, Lisa would assure me that the Andersons were handling those extras. The uncomfortable truth became impossible to ignore during a dinner at the Andersons' penthouse apartment. Lisa had stepped away to take a call, and Brian was engaged in conversation with his mother, leaving me alone with Harold. "I understand you come from humble beginnings," Harold said, swirling his 30-year-old scotch. "Admirable that you've done as well as you have with your little business." "Thank you," I replied, choosing to focus on the compliment rather than the condescension. "You should know," he continued, his voice lowered, "that this wedding is an important social event for our family. Many of our connections will be in attendance, people who can significantly impact Brian's career trajectory." I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. Good, Harold nodded. Then you'll understand why certain standards must be maintained. Lisa is entering our world now, and appearances matter. The implication was clear. I was not part of their world, and my daughter was being assimilated into it. The Andersons were positioning themselves as the arbiters of what was appropriate for Lisa's future, and by extension for the wedding. I left that evening with a heavy heart, realizing that I was being systematically sidelined from one of the most important events in my daughter's life. But I kept my concerns to myself, not wanting to create conflict that might put Lisa in an uncomfortable position between me and her future in-laws. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. As the wedding date approached, my involvement in the planning process dwindled to almost nothing. I would occasionally receive brief updates from Lisa, usually through text messages rather than actual conversations. Venue finalized. Deposit paid. It's gorgeous. Chose the cake. You'll love it, Dad. Guest list expanded to 300. The Andersons have so many friends. I tried to stay positive, reminding myself that this was Lisa's special day, and that the important thing was her happiness, not my role in the preparations. But as others began receiving their formal invitations, while my mailbox remained empty, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. "Lisa," I said during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "I noticed the invitations have gone out, but I haven't received mine yet. Just wanted to make sure it didn't get lost in the mail." There was an uncomfortable pause before Lisa responded. "Oh, Dad, you don't need a formal invitation. You're the father of the bride." Her explanation seemed reasonable, but something in her tone didn't ring true. Still, I accepted her answer and changed the subject. A few days later, I was scrolling through social media when I came across photos of a lavish bridal shower for Lisa that I hadn't known about. The following week, a business acquaintance mentioned running into Lisa and the Andersons at the rehearsal dinner venue tasting. Again, this was an event I hadn't been informed of, much less invited to. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. I decided to confront Lisa directly during our next scheduled dinner. I waited until we had ordered before broaching the subject. "Lisa, I feel like I'm being kept out of the loop on your wedding plans," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I'm finding out about events after they happen, and I'm not being included in decisions that I'm financially supporting." Lisa fidgeted with her napkin, avoiding eye contact. "Dad, it's just been so hectic. Mrs. Anderson has been handling a lot of the details because she has experience with these types of social events. I understand that, but I'm your father. This is your wedding. I should be involved." She sighed, finally looking at me. "The thing is, Dad, the Andersons have certain expectations about the wedding. It's going to be attended by a lot of important people in their social circle." "And," I prompted, feeling a growing knot in my stomach, "and they're concerned that you might feel uncomfortable in that environment." The implication hit me like a physical blow. They think I'm not good enough to be at my own daughter's wedding. No. Lisa backpedaled, looking distressed. "They just think there's a certain etiquette that you might not be familiar with. They're trying to protect both you and the integrity of the event." "Protect me," I repeated incredulously. "Lisa, I've been running my own successful business for 30 years. I've negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts and managed dozens of employees. I think I can handle a wedding reception without embarrassing anyone." Lisa looked pained. "I know that, Dad. It's just, things are different in their world. There are expectations and traditions that are important to them. More important than having your father fully participate in your wedding day," I asked quietly. She didn't have a good answer for that, and the remainder of our dinner was strained and uncomfortable. We parted with a perfunctory hug, but the conversation left me deeply troubled. In the weeks that followed, I made several attempts to reconnect with Lisa and clarify my role in the upcoming wedding. Each time she was evasive or too busy to talk. Meanwhile, I continued to pay vendor deposits and expenses as they were submitted to me, some with breathtakingly high figures that made me wince, but that I covered without complaint. As the wedding date grew closer, I still hadn't received an invitation or any clear information about the ceremony itself. I didn't know if I was expected to walk Lisa down the aisle, make a toast, or simply be another guest. The uncertainty was becoming unbearable. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made a decision. Invitation or not, properly informed or not, I was going to attend my daughter's wedding. I went shopping for a new suit, selecting a conservative dark blue option that I thought would be appropriate for the upscale venue. I had it professionally tailored to ensure a perfect fit. I even prepared a short speech in case I was unexpectedly called upon to offer a toast. I practiced it in front of my bathroom mirror, wanting to strike the right balance between heartfelt emotion and respectable brevity. I included a touching anecdote about Catherine that I thought Lisa would appreciate. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my living room, looking through old photo albums. Pictures of Lisa as a toddler taking her first steps. Lisa on her first day of school, wearing a backpack almost as big as she was. Lisa and Catherine baking cookies together, both of them covered in flour and laughing. Lisa at her high school graduation, proud and beautiful with her whole future ahead of her. "I wish you were here, Catherine," I whispered to the empty room. "You would know how to handle this better than I do." I went to bed with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Despite everything, I believed that when it came down to it, Lisa would want me there on her special day. I had to believe that the years of love and sacrifice meant something that they couldn't be erased by the Andersons' influence or by Lisa's desire to fit into their world. I was wrong. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I dressed carefully in my new suit, polished my best shoes, and even splurged on a professional haircut the day before. Looking in the mirror, I saw a presentable man in his 50s, perhaps not as polished as Harold Anderson with his Savile Row suits, but certainly not someone who would embarrass anyone. I arrived at the venue, an exclusive country estate, about an hour outside the city, well before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The grounds were immaculate with flowering trees and meticulously maintained gardens. Staff were putting final touches on an elaborate outdoor setup with hundreds of white chairs facing a flower-laden pergola. Inside the reception area was being transformed with arrangements of white roses and orchids that must have cost a small fortune. Crystal chandeliers had been brought in to supplement the venue's existing lighting, and each table was set with china and silver that gleamed under the soft lights. All of this had been paid for with my money, yet I felt like an intruder. I noticed Brian's extended family arriving, being warmly greeted by wedding staff who checked their names against a guest list. The women wore designer dresses and spectacular hats, while the men were uniformly attired in expensive suits with that particular cut that only comes from bespoke tailoring. A young woman with a clipboard approached me with a professional smile. "Welcome to the Anderson-Thompson wedding. May I have your name, please?" "Mark Thompson," I said, straightening my shoulders slightly. "I'm the bride's father." Her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Oh, Mr. Thompson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Lisa is getting ready in the bridal suite upstairs if you'd like to see her before the ceremony." The coordinator's warm welcome momentarily eased my anxiety. At least someone recognized my importance to this event. I followed her directions to the bridal suite, my heart lightening with each step. Perhaps my concerns had been overblown. Perhaps today would be the meaningful father-daughter experience I had hoped for. As I approached the partially open door of the bridal suite, I could hear female voices inside, Lisa's bridesmaids, and what sounded like Margaret Anderson offering advice about the veil placement. I knocked gently and pushed the door open a bit further. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. Lisa, half-dressed in her wedding gown with a makeup artist working on her face, looked up with an expression of shock that quickly transformed into alarm. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Before I could respond, she hurriedly excused herself from the makeup artist and rushed over to me, pulling me back into the hallway and partially closing the door behind her. "Dad," she hissed. Her face flushed with what appeared to be embarrassment, rather than the joy I had hoped to see. "What are you doing here so early? The ceremony isn't for hours." "I wanted to see you before everything got too hectic," I explained, confused by her reaction. "The coordinator downstairs said it would be okay." Lisa glanced nervously back toward the room. "It's just not a good time. Mrs. Anderson is helping me get ready, and we have a tight schedule with the photographer." "I won't stay long," I promised. "I just wanted to tell you how beautiful you look and how proud your mother would be." At the mention of Catherine, Lisa's expression softened momentarily, but then footsteps approached the door, and Margaret Anderson appeared, her critical gaze taking in my appearance with poorly disguised disapproval. "Lisa, the hairdresser is ready for you," she said pointedly, ignoring my presence. "I'll be right there," Lisa replied, before turning back to me. "Dad, can we talk privately for a minute? There's something I need to tell you." My stomach tightened with apprehension as I followed Lisa to a small sitting area at the end of the hallway, away from the bridal suite. She wrung her hands nervously, unable to meet my eyes. "Dad, there's been a misunderstanding," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, but you weren't actually invited to the wedding." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? What do you mean I wasn't invited? I'm your father. I'm paying for this entire event." "I know, and I'm grateful, really I am," she said quickly. "But the Andersons and I decided. We thought it would be better if you weren't here today." I struggled to comprehend what she was saying. "Better? How could it possibly be better for me not to attend my only daughter's wedding?" Lisa finally looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding that I couldn't possibly give. "It's complicated. The Andersons have a certain social standing. Their friends, their business associates, they all have expectations about this wedding. You're different from them. From us. Us." I repeated the single syllable encompassing the complete betrayal I felt. "So you're one of them now, and I'm what? An embarrassment, a reminder of your less sophisticated origins." "Dad, please try to understand," Lisa implored. "This wedding is about more than just Brian and me getting married. It's about joining our families, and there are certain standards that need to be maintained." "Standards that I don't meet," I said flatly. "It's not personal," she insisted, though nothing could have felt more personal in that moment. "The Andersons suggested, and I agreed, that having you here might make things uncomfortable for everyone, including you. You wouldn't know the right things to say, the right people to talk to. You might feel out of place. So this is for my benefit." I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "You're excluding me from one of the most important days of your life to spare my feelings." Lisa flinched at my tone. "Dad, I'm sorry. I really am. But this decision has been made. The guest list was carefully curated, and the Andersons have invested a lot in making this day perfect. I've invested more, I reminded her quietly. Not just money, Lisa. Years of my life. Everything I had to give. For a moment I thought I saw genuine regret in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a stubborn resolve that reminded me painfully of myself. I'm sorry, Dad, but I need to ask you to leave. The guests will be arriving soon, and it would be awkward if you were here. I stood there looking at this stranger in a wedding dress who bore my daughter's face, but seemed to have none of her heart. The hurt was so profound, it felt physical, like something breaking inside my chest. All right, Lisa, I said finally, my voice steady, despite the turmoil within. If that's what you want, I'll go. Thank you for understanding, she said, relief evident in her voice. And thank you for everything you've done to make this day possible. The irony of her gratitude for financing a celebration I wasn't welcome to attend was almost too much to bear. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak further, and turned to leave. As I walked through the venue that I had paid for, past the flowers I had financed, and the staff whose services I had covered, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock and hurt were giving way to something else, a quiet, resolute dignity that wouldn't allow me to create a scene or beg for inclusion. I walked out to my car, aware of curious glances from early arriving guests, who perhaps wondered who this man was, leaving the venue just as the celebration was about to begin. I sat in my car for several long minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Then, with deliberate movements, I took out my phone and made a call that would change everything. The drive home from the wedding venue felt surreal, as if I was moving through a dream where nothing quite made sense. The beautiful spring day continued unabated outside my car windows, oblivious to the emotional devastation within. I drove on autopilot, barely registering the familiar landmarks that usually signaled I was getting closer to home. My mind kept replaying Lisa's words and expression as she asked me to leave. There had been embarrassment there, yes, but also something else. A calculation, an assessment of value and cost that had found me wanting. My own daughter had weighed the social capital of the Andersons against the father who had raised her, and I had come up short. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the initial shock had given way to a cold clarity. The hurt remained a throbbing ache behind my ribs, but it was now accompanied by a resolve that straightened my spine as I walked into my house. I went directly to my office and pulled out the folder containing all the wedding financial information. Every contract, every invoice, every receipt was meticulously organized, a habit from years of running my business. I spread them across my desk, creating a paper trail of my daughter's betrayal. The total was staggering, even though I had been tracking the expenses all along. The venue alone cost more than my first house. The flowers were worth a semester of college tuition. The catering bill could have bought a decent car. I picked up my phone and called my bank. "This is Mark Thompson," I said when the representative answered. "I need to stop payment on several checks and reverse some credit card charges immediately." The young man on the other end of the line sounded concerned. "That's a significant request, Mr. Thompson. May I ask the reason?" "The services I paid for are not being provided as agreed," I said simply. It wasn't technically a lie. "I understand, sir. I'll need to transfer you to our fraud department to handle this." I spent the next hour on the phone with various bank representatives explaining my situation in the most general terms possible, while providing all the necessary account numbers and transaction details. By the end of the call, payments to the venue, the caterer, the florist, the band, the photographer, and a dozen other vendors had been stopped or were in the process of being reversed. Next, I called my credit card company and went through a similar process. Yes, I was disputing these charges. No, I had not received the services as promised. Yes, I understood this might take some time to resolve. My final call was to my lawyer, Franklin, who had been handling my business and personal legal matters for over 20 years. "Mark, it's Saturday," he grumbled when he answered. "This better be important." "I've just been thrown out of my daughter's wedding that I paid for in full," I replied without preamble. "And I've initiated the process of stopping all payments and reversing all charges. I need to know where I stand legally." There was a pause before Franklin let out a low whistle. "Well, that certainly qualifies as important. Give me the details." I explained the situation as succinctly as I could, including the approximate amounts involved and the actions I had already taken. "From what you're telling me, you're on solid ground," Franklin assured me after listening. "You paid for services that included your participation in the event. By excluding you, they've materially changed the terms. But Mark," he added, his voice softening, "are you sure you want to do this? This will cause a significant rift with your daughter." "The rift is already there, Franklin," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I didn't create it." "All right," he sighed. "I'll draw up the necessary documents first thing Monday morning. In the meantime, don't respond to any communications from the vendors or from Lisa or the Andersons without consulting me first." I had barely ended the call when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Thompson," an agitated voice greeted me. "This is Robert from Highland Estate. We're having an issue with the payment for your daughter's wedding. The bank is saying the checks have been stopped." "That's correct," I confirmed calmly. "But sir, the wedding is in progress. We've already provided access to the venue the staff is working, and the reception is being set up as we speak." "I understand your predicament," I said. "However, I've been excluded from an event that I paid for. I suggest you take up the matter with the Anderson family, who are currently enjoying your services." I ended the call as Robert began to sputter in protest. Over the next 30 minutes, similar calls came in from the caterer, the florist, and the wedding planner, all with increasing levels of panic in their voices. I gave each the same response: speak to the Andersons. Then came the call I had been both expecting and dreading. Lisa's name flashed on my screen, and I took a deep breath before answering. "Dad!" Lisa's voice was shrill with panic and anger. "What have you done? The venue manager just pulled Brian and me aside to say there's a problem with the payment." "Yes, I've stopped all the payments," I confirmed, maintaining my composure. "Since I'm not welcome at the wedding, I won't be paying for it either." "You can't do this," she nearly screamed. "There are 300 people here. The reception is about to start." "I'm simply respecting your wishes, Lisa," I replied evenly. "You made it clear that I'm not part of this celebration, so neither is my money." "This is childish and vindictive," she accused. "You're ruining the most important day of my life because your feelings are hurt." Her lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. "No, Lisa, you ruined it when you decided your father wasn't good enough to attend your wedding. Actions have consequences. I raised you to understand that." "Fix this, Dad," she demanded, her voice breaking between anger and desperation. "Fix it right now." "I can't do that, Lisa. The decision has been made just like you said earlier. I suggest you speak to the Andersons about covering the costs, since they were so concerned about maintaining their standards for this event." Before she could respond, I heard a male voice in the background asking for the phone. A moment later, Harold Anderson's commanding tone came through the line. "Thompson, what the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. "This is completely unacceptable behavior. I find being barred from my daughter's wedding unacceptable," I replied, matching his tone. Yet here we are. "This is about your ego, isn't it?" he sneered. "You couldn't handle the fact that you don't belong in our social circle, so you're throwing a tantrum like a child. No, Harold, this is about respect, something you and your family have failed to show me from the beginning. I've been patient and accommodating, but being told I'm not welcome at an event I paid for crosses a line. We'll sue you for this, he threatened. I have connections with the best law firms in the city. Feel free to try, I responded. My lawyer is already preparing documentation showing that I paid for services that were then denied to me. But in the meantime, you have guests waiting and vendors demanding payment. I suggest you handle that situation first. I could hear the commotion in the background. Raised voices, people asking questions, probably vendors demanding to know what was happening. This isn't over, Thompson, Harold growled before ending the call. I sat back in my chair, a strange mix of emotions washing over me. There was sadness, certainly at the irreparable damage to my relationship with Lisa, but there was also a sense of righteousness and even liberation. For years I had allowed Lisa and then the Andersons to dictate terms to make me feel less than, despite all I had accomplished and sacrificed. Today, I had finally stood up for myself. My phone continued to buzz with calls and messages that I ignored following Franklin's advice. Instead, I poured myself a rare glass of scotch and raised it in a silent toast to Catherine. I wish you could have seen her in her wedding dress, I murmured to the empty room. She looked beautiful, just like you. Later that evening, I received a text from an old friend whose niece was a server at the venue. Apparently, the wedding had descended into chaos once the payment issues became widely known. Services began to be withdrawn, starting with the bar that closed abruptly, followed by the catering staff refusing to serve the main course. The band packed up their equipment mid-set when their manager received word that their payment had been stopped. According to my friend, Lisa and Brian had left their own reception early, humiliated by the situation and unable to salvage the event, despite Harold Anderson's blustering attempts to intimidate the vendors into continuing their services. The local society pages, which had been primed to cover the wedding of the season, instead ran a small item the following day about an unfortunate payment dispute that had marred what promised to be an elegant celebration. I felt no joy in this outcome, only a solemn acknowledgement that sometimes painful consequences are the only way to convey the seriousness of a betrayal. The weeks following the wedding disaster were eerily quiet. I threw myself into work taking on projects I had previously passed on, due to their demanding schedules or distant locations. Anything to keep my mind occupied and away from the gaping wound that was my relationship with Lisa. Frank, my business partner, noticed the change immediately. You're working like a man-possessed Mark. Everything okay? Just focusing on the business, I replied vaguely. There's a lot of opportunity out there we've been missing. I didn't tell him or anyone else about what had happened. The humiliation of being rejected by my own daughter was too raw, too private to share even with friends who might have offered support. The legal aftermath was handled efficiently by Franklin. As he had predicted, the Andersons did attempt to sue me for intentional infliction of emotional distress and breach of verbal contract. Their case fell apart quickly when Franklin presented evidence that I had been explicitly uninvited from the event I had financed. The vendors caught in the middle eventually settled with the Andersons for partial payments, accepting that the full amounts would likely never be recovered. Through legal channels, I learned that the Andersons had been forced to liquidate some investments to cover the wedding expenses they had assumed would be paid by me. It gave me no pleasure to know this, only a sense of grim vindication that their actions had consequences, just as mine had. Lisa's response to the situation manifested in a series of angry text messages and voicemails that gradually evolved from accusations of betrayal to reluctant acknowledgement that she had hurt me deeply. I read and listened to each one, but didn't respond, not yet ready to engage in a conversation that would inevitably involve more pain. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone who matters," one early message read. "I'll never forgive you for this." Later. "The Andersons blame me for not handling you better, as if you're a problem to be managed rather than a person." And finally, weeks later. "I miss you, Dad. I know I hurt you. I got caught up in everything the Andersons represented and lost sight of what really matters. Please call me back." I saved this last message, but still couldn't bring myself to return the call. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too complete. I needed time to process my own feelings before I could consider rebuilding a relationship with Lisa. During this period of isolation and reflection, I sought help from a therapist, something I had never considered necessary before. Dr. Winters, a compassionate woman in her 60s, listened to my story without judgment and helped me navigate the complex emotions it evoked. "What you're describing is a form of grief," she explained during one session. "You've lost the relationship you thought you had with your daughter, and you're mourning that loss." "Will it ever get better?" I asked, hating how vulnerable I sounded. "That depends on many factors," she replied honestly, "including whether both you and Lisa are willing to build something new from the ashes of what was destroyed." I wasn't sure if that was possible, but I continued the weekly sessions, finding that articulating my feelings in that safe space gradually made them more manageable. 3 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected visitor. I was working in my home office on a Saturday morning when the doorbell rang. Opening it, I found Brian Anderson standing on my porch looking uncomfortable and nothing like the confident young executive I remembered. "Brian," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "What are you doing here? May I come in, Mr. Thompson?" he asked, his usual polish replaced by a nervous sincerity. "I'd like to talk to you. Lisa doesn't know I'm here." Curious, despite my reservations, I stepped aside to let him enter. We sat in my living room, the same room where he and Lisa had announced their engagement, what felt like a lifetime ago. "I owe you an apology," Brian began without preamble. "What happened with the wedding was wrong on every level, and I was complicit in it." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "My parents," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They've always controlled everything in my life. My education, my career path, my social circle. When I met Lisa, it was the first time I'd chosen something for myself, and they responded by trying to mold her into their idea of a suitable wife for their son. And you let them," I observed, not accusingly, but stating a fact. "Yes," he admitted. "I've never stood up to them. Not really. It was easier to go along with their plans for the wedding, to accept their judgment about who should be included. But watching how devastated Lisa has been since that day, seeing the pain my parents' influence caused, I can't do it anymore." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I want you to know that Lisa regrets what happened every day. She's been too ashamed to come and see you herself, convinced you'll never forgive her. My parents have been filling her head with talk about lawsuits and family loyalty, trying to keep her angry at you instead of them. But she's starting to see through it." I considered his words carefully. "What do you want from me, Brian?" "Nothing," he replied quickly. "I just thought you should know the truth. Lisa loves you. She made a terrible mistake letting my parents dictate who could attend her wedding. If you could find it in your heart to reach out to her. It's not that simple," I said, though I felt something shifting inside me at his words. "I know," Brian acknowledged. "But for what it's worth, I'm trying to be a better husband than I was a fiancé. I'm standing up to my parents, setting boundaries. Lisa and I are seeing a counselor to work on making our own decisions as a couple, rather than letting my family control us." As Brian was leaving, he turned back with one last comment. "You know, Mr. Thompson, my father has never apologized for a thing in his life. He sees it as weakness. But watching you stand your ground, refusing to be disrespected even at great personal cost, that took real strength. I'm trying to learn from that example." After he left, I sat for a long time considering our conversation. The anger I had been nurturing began to feel heavy rather than righteous, a burden I was tired of carrying. The next day I sent Lisa a text, "Coffee next Saturday, my place, 10 a.m. Her response came immediately. "I'll be there. Thank you, Dad." Our first meeting was tense but civil. Lisa arrived precisely at 10, looking nervous and subdued, so different from the confident bride who had dismissed me from her wedding. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, as I handed her a mug of coffee prepared the way she had always liked it, light with 2 sugars. "Brian came to see me," I explained, sitting across from her at my kitchen table. "He told me—" She nodded. "It was his idea, but I'm glad he did it. I've been wanting to talk to you for months, but didn't know how to begin." "This seems like a good start," I offered. Lisa took a deep breath. "Dad, I am so deeply sorry for what happened at the wedding. There's no excuse for how I treated you, how I let the Andersons influence me to exclude my own father from one of the most important days of my life." I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, and it softened something inside me that had been rigid with hurt for months. "Why?" I asked simply. "Why did their opinion matter more than our relationship?" Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I got caught up in their world, the connections, the status, the power. Mrs. Anderson would make these little comments about how I needed to refine certain aspects of myself to fit in, and gradually that extended to you. They never criticized you directly, just constantly implied that you wouldn't be comfortable in their social circle, that you wouldn't know how to behave or what to say." "And you believed them," I said. "I did," she admitted, wiping away a tear. "Or I convinced myself it was true, because it was easier than standing up to them. Brian never stood up to his parents, so I thought that was just how things were done in their world. I was so focused on being accepted by them that I betrayed the one person who had always accepted me unconditionally." We talked for hours that day, painful, honest conversations about the wounds we had inflicted on each other. I acknowledged that my reaction to being excluded, while understandable, had been deliberately calculated to cause maximum embarrassment. Lisa admitted that she had known all along that excluding me was wrong, but had been too cowardly to stand up to the Andersons. It wasn't an immediate reconciliation. Trust once broken doesn't mend in a single conversation. But it was a beginning, a foundation upon which we could potentially build something new. Over the following months, Lisa and I continued to meet regularly. Sometimes Brian joined us. Sometimes it was just the 2 of us. Each conversation brought a little more healing, a little more understanding. I learned that Lisa and Brian had established firm boundaries with the Andersons after the wedding debacle. They had even declined the lavish honeymoon the Andersons had planned for them, opting instead for a simple trip to a beach cottage where they could process everything that had happened. The real turning point came that Christmas when Lisa invited me to dinner at their apartment. To my surprise, Harold and Margaret Anderson were also there, looking distinctly uncomfortable in a setting they didn't control. "Mr. Thompson," Harold began stiffly after dinner, clearly prompted by either Lisa or Brian. I owe you an apology for my behavior regarding the wedding. It was inappropriate to exclude you from your daughter's celebration. It wasn't the most heartfelt apology I'd ever heard, but from a man like Harold Anderson, it represented a seismic shift. Thank you, Harold, I replied with equal formality. I appreciate that. Later, as Lisa walked me to the door, she shared some news that put everything into perspective. Dad, she said quietly, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, Brian and I are expecting. You're going to be a grandfather. In that moment, looking at my daughter's hopeful face, I felt the last of my resentment dissolve. Life was too short and too precious to waste on anger when new beginnings were possible. That's wonderful news, sweetheart, I said, pulling her into a hug. Truly wonderful. As I drove home that night, I thought about the lessons of the past year. I had learned the importance of standing up for myself, of not accepting disrespect, even from those I loved most. Lisa had learned that true family isn't about social status or appearances, but about the unconditional support that sustains us through life's challenges. It had been a painful journey for both of us, but perhaps a necessary one. Our relationship would never be the same as before. In some ways, it would be more honest, more balanced. We had both seen the worst in each other, and were choosing to move forward anyway, with clearer boundaries and greater appreciation for what we almost lost permanently. In the end, that seemed like a fair trade for the pain we had endured. Not a perfect, happy ending, but a real one. Messy, complicated, and ultimately hopeful, just like life itself. I wonder if you've ever had to stand up for yourself, even when it meant potentially losing someone you love. Have you experienced a painful family conflict that eventually led to growth and healing? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button. Subscribe to hear more of my experiences and share this with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late for reconciliation. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the ones that ultimately save our most important relationships.